Hi everyone, welcome to the Maple Syrup Show. We are sendless at the moment, unfortunately, because work commitments, but luckily we have two fantastic and amazing people who have joined us this evening. We have got Andrew Stiles, who is a stylish game designer, and we have Chad Elkins from 25th Century Games. Now, we are going to ask them some questions and we'll find out why they're here. So, first of all, what we usually do is we ask you your origin story. So that is how you got into games in general, and then sort of go through and become a little bit more specific about how you got to where you are now. Chad, I reckon we're going to start with you. Except we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. So what I have figured out is that this will not let me mute and unmute quickly. I unmute, and I think it's like a lag on when it finally stops being that. So I just won't mute. So hopefully there won't be any sound here. I'm by myself down here, so it's not a big deal. Anyway, hey, thanks for having me on the show. I have a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yay!
Nice.
So origin story, radioactive spider, the usual. Basically, I was working at a video game startup, and really kind of was getting into that, and then I really thought it would be fun to take the properties and like the characters and the things that we're making from a video game startup standpoint, and simultaneously build them out as board game or card game, like physical versions to try to reuse the IP and the worlds that characters building across both sides. And the studio at the time didn't want to really push in that direction. They wanted to stay focused purely on digital, totally fine. And so I was like, well, hey, why don't I see what I can do? I can't, there's no way for me to increase my volume. I'm sorry. This is about the best I can do. So basically I licensed the artwork from the first game, and I made a card game called Robots Love Ice Cream. That was the first little game I put on Kickstarter like 7 years ago. And enjoyed the process. About a year later, made another game, and then about a year later, made another game, and so that just kind of slowly started this this gradual build, I guess, over the last 6 or 7 years.
So you say made a game. Were you the game designer?
On that one, yeah.
Neat.
That's why it's not very good. It's okay. It was a first-time project. I learned a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. It did make me quickly kind of learn that I am not a good designer from like an original design standpoint. Much better at taking something that the framework and like the original structure and the creativity behind that original structure exists, and much better at kind of shepherding that through from a componentry and from like an art direction standpoint and guiding development. But yeah, that's what I found was my strength is the publishing side of it, not the designing side. But it was still a fun project and a good learning project to have that first one out of the way. Obviously, you're experiencing that right now with your campaign.
Hopefully,
yeah, it was small scale, and it was a good learning. Kind of like cut your teeth on it. Then knocked the training wheels off and kind of went from there.
And so you just decided, this is what I love, I'm going to be a publisher. Did you jump straight into it full time, or was it a gradual process?
No, super, super, super gradual. Only very recently, as in next week, will be full time.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's really exciting. I'm going to ask you some more about that in a minute. Let's get some background on who's this other person that we have here. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Andrew Stiles. I am a first-time game designer. My first game being Cellar. It's being done by 25th Century, and he did an amazing job on it. It looks great. I'm very, very happy with art by Vincent Dutrait. Production is great.
I mean, just casually, right? First game, Vincent Dutrait. This is fine. Wow.
I have to say that, Chad's been doing a great job on these games for a while now. And he was definitely on my radar as someone who I knew could produce a game, any game, and make it look great to begin with. So I was happy to pitch him this one. And thankfully, he and his wife liked playing it. I'm really, really thankful for that because, yeah, they absolutely killed the production aspect. And I'm incredibly happy about that. And I know that once a game looks great, people will buy it and then they'll play it. And hopefully they'll like playing it and tell their friends and then they'll buy more copies. And it just kind of cascades down the road that way. And then I created this game as a way for me to help people who are not in the hobby get into the hobby, right? So like I want to show this game to people who love and worship wine basically and think about wine a lot or in the wine industry, but they don't have a card game they can play. They don't have something that they can just kind of like casually play around with, like they play spades or hearts or something like that. So I'm hoping this helps bridge the gap and they can understand that games have come a long way since then.
So how you're talking about bringing other people into the gaming world, but how did you get into the gaming world?
So I've been a hobby level gamer, I think, since I was born. My parents were hobby level gamers back before most people knew about what that was. And like, I mean, I grew up on like Avalon Hill and Rio Grande and stuff like that before most people, even in the gaming world, knew those things. And so there were two things that my parents believed heavily in. We always had games and we always had books. So like both those things are learning devices for children growing up and help you make empathy decisions, but also help you learn how to make difficult decisions and strategic choices in life, not just, in the game itself. So those were things that my parents believed heavily in. And then it wasn't until the pandemic where I thought, you know what, I could try my hand at this, but I'd also had, 30 years of gaming experience to draw on and have those things that I liked and didn't like already in my quiver to attack this hobby with.
And I'm going to take a quick moment just to say hello to everyone we've got at the moment. We've got Troy, Roberto, Tyler, Dee Dee, Zoe. It's lovely to see you all here. Thank you for saying hello. If anyone else is lurking, please feel free to say hi and ask any questions. So Andrew, one of the things that you mentioned was that you sort of felt like you had this deep background in game design, but most game designers I know have actually been designing games their whole lives as part of that. Did you not design until you felt ready and you'd mainly just been playing, or had you actually been tinkering prior to that?
I had an idea for this wine game before I tried to do it, right? Like I always thought I was a former sommelier, so I was definitely in the industry of wine. And so I had all this knowledge and kind of like when they tell writers, write what you know, for me, that was one of the things I knew, right? So it was something I could attack and be knowledgeable from the very start. But then also I had to find a way to do something that wasn't heavy, right? I didn't want to make another viticulture or vinos or anything like that. But I did feel like there wasn't enough light versions of a wine game, right? So I thought, what could I do that would be different? And then that's when I thought about aspecting the area of aging wine, which is even people who know wine can be a little ambiguous, right? Or not really concrete. And it's difficult to fully wrap your brain around. But I thought if I could do a lower level of that as far as a teach goes and help people to understand a little bit about how it works, the specifics of the wine you literally pick up from the supermarket is a little more complicated. But if I could give you a general basis. So in this game, what I did was I tried to find a bunch of wine types that everybody kind of knows, at least in the first couple levels, and then kind of give a semi-accurate aging description for that. Then I could go into the funky, cool, interesting ones further down the line and then also give a timeline on that. So that was always in the back of my brain. And then it was just a matter of trying to find the right way to execute that.
So that has answered one of my other questions, which I was actually going to ask Chad as well, is when people pitch the games to you generally, Chad, have they already been thematically integrated, and do you often retheme, or are you the kind of publisher that likes a deeply thematic game to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to think there have been games that we have rethemed, right? And I say we as in like working in concert with the designer. I mean, it's never been something that was tossed over a fence and then a year later, hey, here's your game, right? Like that's just not how I work anyway. But so I mean, I demand a lot out of designers, in the lightest, kindest way possible. I do like a heavily involved designer in the process. That's something that I do look for, and I'm very upfront about that. Like I don't want to drive by game signing, right there, but like a lot of companies, even if you want to be more involved as a designer, that is just how it is, and that's just
Yeah.
what you deal with. Me being a much smaller shop, I mean, I certainly could outsource full development on a game, but I think the designer generally is going to know the ins and outs of that game better. The designer is going to know where there are threads you can pull and where there are threads you can't pull without putting in a lot of extra development time on it. And so from an involvement standpoint, that's how I work. But yeah, ideally a game comes in with a theme. Not every game has to be just this intensely integrated thematic experience, right? I mean, like there's games we've published that theme, you can call it pasted on, but in the reality, almost any game is a pasted on theme. I think where theme comes into play, I think, is can you find a theme to put on the flow of the game that makes what you are doing and what you think you need to do next to move and advance the game forward, if theme can benefit that or logically connect it to how it might score or what you're trying to do, that's where theme is important to me. I will also say I like the process of the bringing the X's and O's, whatever you want to call them, the ones and zeros, to life visually. Like I really get involved in that process of what is the period setting going to be, or what's the aesthetic going to be of that design. So that's the part that I really enjoy. Like, and obviously and I include the designer, as much as possible in that. But most of the time, that's in concert with my graphic design team, Matt Paquette and folks, plus the artist that we're talking to. And so that's the piece where I think I bring a lot to the table, and hopefully that comes across in the games that 25
yes.
label on, because that's my where I bring to the table.
I think I've already told you that if I were able to pitch to someone, like if I were able to just say, this is where I want to get it published, 25th Century has been the top of my list for well over a year. Like it was one of the first companies that came onto my radar. And ever since, like almost everything you've published, I've just gone, I have to have that.
Yeah.
And it's not just because visually I'm immediately like, oh, I love that, but also it's because of the effort that you put into integrating the theme and the art style and the gameplay. And I can just automatically tell I'm going to really enjoy the experience of this game. And as a designer makes me think, oh, I really want to work with this person. And the fact that you are actually saying all of those things as well, I'm like, oh, so I didn't just imagine that. That is definitely what is happening. And so, I mean, it's not just me as well. Like I know a lot of designers who are going, if I could, it would be with 25th Century. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on the show, to find out some more about how you make these decisions. And because not everyone can be that kind of publisher.
Right.
And not everyone has the luxury of being that kind of publisher as well, because there are a lot of choices you have to make to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also, I appreciate the kind words. Absolutely. That means a lot.
It's 100% true.
Most of the time you just hear the negative when you're dealing with support issues or whatever. But I think you say that, but I also, I would point, the mirror right back, right? I think what you've done with BubbleNet, I think from taking a thematic concept of a very interesting idea, right? And I think, whales and using bubbles to fish, like that is not a common theme that you're going to see a lot. And I'm not saying all the themes on games I make are 100% unique and weird and no one knows about them, right? I mean, we got a donut game, right? So, but I will say, I think like the way that you also approach BubbleNet is really in that one game is still the exact same process that I would go through on maybe 6, 8 games a year. It's no different. I think you did a great job with that game as well. And I think what you walked through for that is exactly what I would walk through.
Thank you. It's very reassuring to hear that I'm going in the right direction as a brand new publisher. So for anyone who doesn't know background, we have our first Kickstarter running right now. So everyone on this show right now has a Kickstarter running. Theirs is funded. Theirs is very funded. Mine started what day is it? It's Wednesday, so it launched yesterday. It's been a very long 2 days.
Well on your way. Like your trajectory is
Yes.
totally fine for where you're at after one day. The first game I literally funded about 5 minutes before the bell hit. And so yeah, you're doing just fine.
Thank you. And yes, it is a very sort of nerve-wracking experience doing it, but at the same time, I don't think it matters how many times you've done this. Every single time you're putting yourself out there and you're going, how about today? Do people like me today?
Sucks. Always sucks.
Is it going to work this time?
Stomach drops. You're like, oh God, please show up. Please, people show up and like this. It doesn't make a difference if it's your first one or your 30th one. That gut punch is always there.
And how many have you done now?
Oh, I don't know.
It's close to that kind of number, isn't it? It's a lot.
Maybe from like a crowdfunding campaign standpoint, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15. I don't know what the number is. Obviously, published games is a different number. Just because I localize a lot of games as well, and not all of those go to Kickstarter. But yeah, it doesn't make a difference whether it's 1 or 20. It's that morning when you're about to hit that button. You're like, oh please God, let's do this.
And so Andrew, that's a really different experience actually for you, isn't it? Because Chad and I were both in charge of our Kickstarters as well, but you're kind of sitting there next to it. What was that like?
I think it's almost as nerve-wracking. I mean, obviously you're much more invested than I am in it that way, but I definitely was hitting refresh every hour and checking the differences and, trying not to be obnoxious while also trying to do marketing for it, right? Like,
absolutely. That's hard,
Chad
isn't
does
it?
marketing very well on and of itself, but I also I didn't want to just let it be and hope for the best. I had to be at least proactive in some level. So I was definitely trying to get the word out, trying to be on shows like this one and just make sure that people knew it existed and hopefully, talk more about what makes it special in a way that could connect with people.
Yeah, honestly, I think Andrew's been great, by the way, and very, very fortunate to have a designer that's excited and vocal and willing to talk about what's happening, right? Not every designer is comfortable with that, and not every designer has to be as out there as Andrew. But I think there's an authenticity to that I think resonates with people versus a brand, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think I can go and build ads and put them on BGG or build ads and put them on Facebook or Google or wherever. But there's something about, and like, I'm not like an over face, like, I'm just not like a Stegmaier or somebody who's very front of their brand, right? Some
Right.
people know who I am personally, but most people don't, right? And maybe that should change hopefully, but in the future I get more time to work on this stuff. But like having that person in front brings an authenticity, like having you in front of BubbleNet as a person brings authenticity to it versus Dreyer Inc., right?
Yes.
Brand. And I think any
I'm Dreyer Inking today as well.
There you go. But like the thing is, like, someone doesn't have to know it's Dreyer Inc., right? They just know you and the game, and they want to support you and support the game, And I think anytime a designer is willing and feels comfortable doing it, it's an absolute blessing to a publisher if a designer is very proactive and talking about their game. I think right now I see another good example of this besides Andrew. I see Amon from his Gnome game,
yes,
the Up, right?
Yes.
It would be very easy for him to just never talk about, never be seen, step in the background. He's got a large brand, a publisher that's got more
All
people
the
working
reach.
full time on
Yep.
that game than
Right.
I have in total contract people throughout the year, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, but he's in front of that, and it still feels authentic, even though it's under a label that people don't necessarily look at as an authentic label. Like
I mean,
the
he's literally making portraits of individual influencers and then
right?
making them their own custom little meeples of the gnomes and
I know.
sending them out
Andrew, where
to
you at,
them.
man? Come on. Where's custom wine
Wow.
bottles? I don't know. What are you doing?
I mean, that is definitely something you could be doing. Like you could be tailoring wine to different recipients because you actually have that deep knowledge. I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying that's a really interesting thing that you could even just do a wine profile for people. That could be a really interesting little bit of promotion, couldn't it? Like I really like, okay, I'm going to do the really obvious one. I like red meat. Which kind
Okay.
of wine should I have with my red meat?
So, there's a standard answer, which is I would go big, bold cab, right? Like
There we go.
that's the automatic there. But there are a lot of subtleties in there as well. For instance, you could go with a Cab Franc, which is slightly different than a cab, right? It's got big, bold, smoky flavors as far as that goes, but it also has some more nuance to it. Whereas the other one is really just to punch you in the mouth. That one takes a little bit of a step back. So, there are lots of nuances and lots of different things there. And I think if you want to pick up this game called Wine Cellar, you can see what the tasting notes on the bottle of a Cab Franc would be. And maybe it encourages you to go explore a different type of wine from maybe some other countries as well. So, I can be your personal sommelier, but it's going to cost you a lot. Or you can pick up this game for $20 and get part of my
learn
knowledge
some stuff.
for a very small discount.
Yes. I mean, it's funny because I grew up now. Apparently, the stream is down, but it is still recording, so people will be able to catch it later. I'm sure that George is busy frantically trying to get things to work in the background. But in the meantime, we're just going to keep talking because the recording will work. So one of the things that was very interesting for me about this game is I grew up in a family that were very interested in books and board games. And my dad in particular was very interested in wine when I was younger. And my mum and her current husband are very much wine drinkers as well. George and I don't drink, but by choice, basically. But I still remember the really interesting pairings that you can do with wine. And I love the idea of there being this game that can teach me more depth for that. So I mean, I do know quite a bit more about wine than just red wine with red meat kind of stuff. But
Sure.
It's a good starting point for people.
Yeah.
And in the same way, this game is a good starting point for people. So if you were someone who really did actually want to learn a bit more about wine, how would this game help you do that? Did you freeze, Andrew? No.
Yeah, I think I got
Okay.
most of that. I got most of that question though. So I think that the game won't directly teach you about wine, but what it does is it allows things that are in the background to be things you can explore, right? So I have 3 countries in every 18 cards of this, and each of those countries has different wines that they make, right? Some of those overlap with other wines in the world and whatever not. But I also, the deeper you go into the game, the higher the number and the bid value, the more obscure or lesser known they're going to get. So you can get, the stuff that everybody knows, the Sauvignon Blancs and the Pinot Grigios on the lower stuff. And then, when you get up to like the Hungaries and the Cyprus wines and you're looking at Janudis and, different things like that, you're gonna be like, whoa, I've never heard of that before. And then you can see tasting notes for it. And you can see an approximate version of how well that wine would age. So you can intrinsically understand a little bit about what that is. And then maybe it encourages you to explore more. And if you're not a drinker, you don't have to be to enjoy the game, because all the information you need to play the game like you were a sommelier, like you did have that knowledge, is in the front of the card, right? So it's not like you have to have previous knowledge, or you will have better chance of winning the game if you were a somm. Like that person doesn't have a leg up on you because all the information you need for the game is already on the card. So, I was playing this 2 weeks ago at Geekway, and there was a 10-year-old playing next to me, and they were hate drafting me. So they were schooling me, took my score right down, and they were having a blast. And obviously, a 10-year-old is not drinking wine, but she was looking at the tasting notes too. So, I mean, like she could tell what those flavor profiles were, and she was just picking on me, and it worked out for her. So there we go.
Well, that's really useful actually, because so you can learn things from it, but it doesn't actually put you in a position where you have like superior knowledge that will allow you to win from outside the game. That, I mean,
Correct.
That's both good and yeah, I mean, I think in general that's good, right? Because you can still learn stuff from it, but it doesn't mean that you're coming in basically being like, oh, I'm an expert in wine, therefore I'm going to thrash everyone, because I think that's a bit less fun for everyone else. So I think that, yes, as I process this, I agree. I got that.
Yeah, the whole
Yeah,
point
well, I wanted this game to be accessible and something that everybody can pick up and play, right? And hopefully they learn something about wine, but also I'm hoping that if they know about wine, they learn something about board games, right? Like they learn something about card games, something about how the hobby has evolved and shifted and become so much better that maybe it helps them to decide they want to explore that side either. So this is kind of dipping my toe in both pools and seeing which side wants to try the other pool.
That, I mean, it's a good idea to do that with a card game in particular, because card games are so accessible and they're so hot right now. Like every convention I've been to recently, there are a few people sitting around the big heavy tables, but there are so many more just going, you know what, let's just play card games all afternoon. And I don't mean like a deck of 52 kind of card games. I mean like all kinds of, I mean, there was Far Away recently that's resurged. There was I mean, Tichu is still around and still this huge thing, and there are all the trick takers that are taking over the world at the moment. And I mean, it's fascinating how much card games, and of course, there's the 18 card game kind of vibe that has been around for a while with Button Shy and people like that. But there's just this really strong feeling at the moment that people just want to hang out with their friends and do something light and fun for the afternoon, rather than deep dive into this thing that takes as long as it takes to play to set up, which is also great, but it's just not what people are into right now. So
I think
is that what made you think of card games? Or
I think there's a place for both. And I think what I'm going to say to answer the second question there is, I think there's a social aspect that people really want to do in this. And sometimes when you play a heavier game, you focus on the game so much that you're not talking about the person's date the night before, or how the PTA meeting went with, your neighbor, or, did they win their soccer game that they played on the weekend, or things like that. And if you're playing a light game, you can either have those interactions before you get into the deep game, right? You can do it as a warm up, getting there while you're waiting for people to show up or whatever. And you can have that social experience. You can have that, cocktail or drink or soda and chat about stuff while you play something light. And then everybody can focus on the deep game. Or you can reverse that where, okay, we've burned ourselves out. Our brains are melted. Now I want a comfort. I want something that's easy and quick and light. And now we can catch up and have sociability on the back end. So I don't think it has to be either or, but I think that having both is something that should be available to everybody.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of that. It's, I mean, recently recently as in the last, year and a half or so, I've attended a huge number of board game conventions. And one of the things I noticed was so many of us were trying to play so many big games back to back. And that's the first time each time, right? So you're not just playing a game, you're learning a game over and over and over and over. Ooh. On the first convention, when I hit 2 in a row, that was like 2 games at all that I was learning in a row. I was like, nah, 3 is too many. Now I can learn. I mean, what did I do? I think just recently at the Gathering of Friends, one of the days I learned 16 games in a row.
Ooh, that's too many.
And one of them was Darwin's Journey.